Hi, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Ashton Church, Talent Solutions Director here at Gattaca Solutions, and today I'm joined by Simon Brookes.
Thank you, Ash. My name's Simon Brookes. I'm the Interim Executive Dean of the Faculty of Creative and Cultural Industries at the University of Portsmouth.
Excellent. Thanks, Simon. So today we're just going to be talking about AI and in particular with a look at education and how it's impacting education. To set the scene a little bit, we were introduced in October, and I think I would describe us as two people who are early-ish adopters, enthusiastic about AI, certainly not technical experts, and just kind of muddling through and exploring it and seeing how it goes. We sat down and I thought I had a really great chat in October, about 3 hours, just comparing notes and experiences. So really just wanted to recreate that today, have a chat about that.
Great.
But also reflect on the fact that that was 5-6 months ago. Since then, there's been so many new tools come out. Deep research from ChatGPT, DeepSeek from China. It's changing at such a rapid pace that I think we were just saying in the intro, in the warm up, that we're struggling a little bit to keep up with it.
Totally.
And we're people who find it interesting.
Not
everyone does.
It's madness. Just trying to keep up with it on a week by week basis. I'm finding it practically impossible. On top of my day job, it's not my main job. And as you said in the intro, I'm fascinated by this technology. I mean, it's worth just giving a bit of background. I've always been interested in technology. I'm a nerd, really. I think I love new tech. And I've always tried to, where I can in my sort of education career, see how we can sort of integrate technology into learning, just because I find it really interesting, but it's also normally ends up quite interesting for students, just as a little example, I've done things in the past where I've used Twitter for teaching when Twitter first came along. I've used things like game-based learning, and I set up a course which was based around something called alternate reality games, which was like a rich simulation that sort of lasted for 12 weeks in the classroom. So I'm just always looking for new things. And when the technology arrives, sort of thinking, how can I use that? Not only in my day job, but actually, I mean, not only in the management of my day job, but actually also in the delivery when I'm teaching. And then this arrived, And I think like most people, it made me stop and think, this is a real game changer. This is different. And I've just been really into it since then, and I've been trying to, like everyone in education and like everyone in any sector, really trying to work out what it really means, what are the implications for our jobs, what are the implications from my point of view for our students, what does it really mean? How are we going to adapt? How are we going to adopt? How are we going to communicate this to colleagues? There's so much to it. And it's quite interesting because, I remember going around the university, I think it was about a year ago. I'm sort of losing track of time now. Maybe it was slightly longer than that, but it was maybe a year and a half ago. And I think ChatGPT was a year old at that point, and I think they were on version 3.5. I just remember going around the university and saying, "Can you believe this is a year old?" Because it had such an impact already. But as you said in the intro, so much has changed. So much has changed in this last 12 months or so. Well, in terms of the technology, I still think that, when we'll get into this, I still think that we're lagging in terms of what we really do with these tools and this technology. And I think most people, apart from some of the people maybe that I follow on LinkedIn who are, they've either adopted it as a new part of their job or they've created a job from it. They're going around telling people how to use these tools and coming up with some smart ideas. I think most people are just grappling around trying to sort of think, what does this really mean and how can I use it effectively? And the other side of it is that it is creating challenges, significant challenges in education. And we can talk about that as well.
Absolutely. I'd love to come on to that. Before we do, could you just give an idea about how you use it personally, day to day? Kind of comes to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's two aspects of this, I guess. I didn't mention, but I'm actually doing some research around this. and I'm looking at how we can use it from an educator perspective, but actually from a teacher's perspective. How can it support some of the tasks that teachers do? So my current slice of research is looking at assessment and how we can use these tools actually for assessing students' work. So you put the essays in. Is it as good at grading student essays as a human might be, or as a group of humans might be? So that's some research I'm doing at the moment. Issues with essays, we can get onto that. So that's one side of it. But actually, on a day-to-day basis, I use it for problem solving, for helping me understand complex issues, things that I just don't really know enough about. So I'll often find myself having quite long conversations with. I tend to use ChatGPT at the moment. And literally long conversations sometimes, because I use it on my phone and I'll talk to it. So it'll help me to understand much more deeply concepts that I don't really know enough about, or feel like I need to know a little bit more about, and that's sometimes work related, sometimes just general stuff. I will use it for helping me to write reports as a starting point, more often than not, sometimes more. I'll use it for helping me to develop my thinking around maybe strategic things that I need to be doing in my role. I'll use it for helping me to draft emails, particularly ones that might be a little bit tricky, just to sort of double check that I'm on the right track and it's the right tone. And I use it all the time for that. And actually, I'm not a great writer. Shouldn't be saying that as a senior academic, but I'm not a great writer. I've struggled with writing. I think I'm a little bit dyslexic actually, but I've always struggled with that. So it really helps me sort of develop my confidence around that as well, and of course it speeds things up so much. So it's saving me an enormous amount of time. So I'm finding myself using it more and more and more. And we can certainly have a conversation about whether I feel like I'm using it too much, or whether I am, and how do you define that? And I think we should talk about that, because I think it's really interesting. So that's it really on a day-to-day basis. But I imagine I use it, I don't know, probably about 4 or 5 or 6 times a day, maybe even more. I don't know. It's maybe it's becoming a habit.
Well, let's get into that, because it's something we discussed as well. And I think my habits are pretty similar, using it. And tying into a point you said earlier, I think I almost have a growing frustration that I see the capability of it and I just can't quite figure out how to really get the most out of it, or really find the problem statement that it solves. And so that's kind of where I'm searching. And but I definitely have this feeling around, sometimes, am I using it as a crutch too much? Is it actually impacting my skills that I've got in terms of critical thinking, ideas, strategy, all of those things, and writing? And it sounds like you're having the same kind of feeling.
I am. I'm sort of struggling with this a little bit from that point of view, because it sort of goes against everything that I've ever been trained and taught to do, I think, which is sort of rely on my own cognitive abilities, my own critical thinking skills, my own ideas. And I don't know how much I'm handing over to ChatGPT at the moment, or whether it is really just supporting and enhancing that skill. And I haven't done enough work around it, but I know that it's enough to make me feel uncomfortable at the moment sometimes. And I've started sort of being open about it when I'm using it. It's almost like originally it was a bit like, well, I can't say that I've been using ChatGPT. Cheating. And now I'm sort of quite explicit about it. And it's becoming less of a problem from that point of view, because I know more and more of my colleagues are actually using it, to support some of these tasks. So I did a piece of work yesterday. Well, I've actually been working on it for quite a few days now. And interestingly, the work, it's a big piece of work. It's about vision and future, and and with ChatGPT, and actually having proper conversations with it. I reckon I've done at least 8 hours solid work on this. I mean, literally just the crafting of the thinking and the drafting and so on and so forth. It's probably more than that. So even with that tool, it's taken me a lot of time, and I'm very engaged with it. And I will start with it with saying, well, look, this is the sort of thing that I'm trying to develop at the moment. I'm thinking about this. These are the key categories and criteria that I need, that I'm thinking about in terms of vision. Let's start the and it's very much a sort of a conversation for me. It's not like, well, there's the output, great. So it'll be, well, okay, well, that's quite good, and actually I hadn't thought about that, and that's interesting. But it will be, well, let's change this, and I don't like that, and that's not what I meant, and so I'm having those sort of conversations with it, which feels less like cheating, because I'm very much sort of, if you like, I don't know, this is the right way of putting it, sort of imposing my will on it. And so it's quite interesting from that point of view. But the output, I think, is better because of that. It's much more considered. There are things in there that I definitely wouldn't have thought about. Now, there are ways of saying things, and maybe I'm just thinking of like headings for things, that I probably wouldn't have written in the same way. But I look at them sometimes and think, actually, I think that's probably better than the way that I would have written this. And so that's the sort of thing. But I finished this I've drafted this piece of work, and I've shared it with colleagues, and the email said, I've spent the last 2 days working with my ChatGPT helper, or Overlord, to craft this document. So I felt like I've had to declare it. And I think that's sort of right, but I'm not sure yet. And I don't know how it lands still, because they might be going, oh yeah, great, because that's exactly what I would have done. Or they might be thinking, oh, well, you've cheated, haven't you? You haven't written that at all. And actually I can tell. So I'm still in that sort of mode with it at the moment. And so I don't know whether that sort of resonates with the way that you're using it.
It definitely does. I think that does resonate. Coming back to the point though around it being a crutch, I think I take a lot of comfort that it's come into my life. I've just turned 40. It's that sort of age. I'm very lucky that I've developed, I think, all the critical thinking skills and all those tools. I don't think I'd be so comfortable if I was a student at this point, or at the start of my life, without having those tools. I think it could really hamper my gaining those skills, and I'll become completely reliant on it. So to frame that as a question, bring that back to your kind of conundrum at university. How does that play into your mind with how students are starting to use it, and how you're encouraging them to use it?
I think it's a really excellent point, because you're right. We are where we are, and we're using this tool, and we have a whole lifetime of experience behind us that will help inform the way that we're using these tools. That doesn't necessarily mean that I won't sometimes think, oh, I haven't got time for doing this, so just do it, belch something out, and I'll use that, So, that might be helpful for things like less critical work, like emails and various things. If it's just say, can you just get this done quickly? Here's what I want to write. Might save me 5 minutes, it might save me 2, but that's a lot in a day when you're doing 100 emails or something. So, there are less critical, I think, use cases where I don't think it's that important. But I think the point that you make is really important, because how is this impacting cognitive ability? How is it impacting learning? And that's one of the big challenges for education. Where these tools are available and you can wholesale hand it over, how is that impacting the sort of developing brain, or the learning brain, in terms of developing those skills which traditionally we've thought are really important, critical analysis skills, being able to research, being able to. I mean, one of the critical things for me, and I think it came across probably in the conversation, but just to draw an explicit point to it, is being able to review the content that comes out of this thing. Yeah,
being
able
to
sort of make an assessment
Yeah.
about whether, and that is that critical analysis thing. Is it good? Is it any good? Does it mean anything? Is it accurate? Has it just made something up? Because they still do. It's getting much more powerful now, and there's less of this. I think over the next 3 years, we'll be able to trust 99% of the time. I mean, how much can you trust what comes out of the mouth of people?
Well, exactly.
So I think they're probably better already than people, frankly, from that perspective. But we do need to have that critical eye, and unless we're happy to say this is a task that we can 100% hand over to an agent, an AI agent, you still need the human in the loop. And so, those skills that we've talked about, that you talked about there, that we may have developed over our experience of education, are proving to be essential at the moment in terms of us adapting these tools to our working practices. So there is a real challenge there, and it's something that education, while we're in this transition phase, the tools are here, they're increasingly powerful, they're changing on a day-to-day basis. We're not really sure what the impact's going to be in work, but we can talk about that because I think it will be massively significant, and that will ultimately end up changing what we're expecting people to do, and their skill sets that they need. But at the moment, we're in this transitional phase where we're asking. Let's just talk about graduates. We're asking graduates to go out into a world of work to do tasks mostly that are still non-impacted by AI, but their skill sets may be impacted because AI is there for them at the moment. So we're in this really sticky transitional phase. And from an education point of view, we need to know that the work that students are producing, has integrity. If we're going to give you a degree, we need to know that we're giving you the degree and we're not giving ChatGPT a degree.
Yeah.
And they're the education struggles, and it's significant. I was at a roundtable event yesterday at the university with some physicists and mathematicians, and they had a professor come down from Hull University, a guy called Professor Kevin Pimblett, who's done some interesting work using ChatGPT, and essentially, I think what he did was put the core, the exams into ChatGPT, and it got a 2-1, in physics, which is a problem.
Yeah, that is a problem.
Now, which is fascinating, which is amazing, remarkable. But it challenges what we're doing in education, and it really shines a light on how we think about assessment, what we're asking students to do in terms of learning and teaching, and it's bringing up lots of arguments and discussions that have been around in education forever, really, which is about what do we assess, how do we assess, what are the important skills and abilities that we're assessing, knowledge, what's critical, but it's really sort of it's forcing everyone to rethink all of those things again. And interestingly, a lot of places, and you can see why, are moving back to old-fashioned types of assessment, exams, because the only way you can really be confident that a student isn't, in quotes, cheating, is you sit them in a room without access to any of this technology and say, you tell me what you know.
With a pen and paper and show me at this point of time
in
your head.
And isn't that a paradox given the power of the technology that we've got available to us? It's
a strange state of affairs, isn't it?
It's really, really difficult because there's so many problems with exams. I mean,
how so?
Well, I've always hated exams because I was never good at them.
Right.
So I never set them for my students, right? And the reason I was never any good at exams is because I've got a terrible memory. Yeah. And some people are brilliant at exams because they've got a brilliant memory, and actually a lot of people would argue, depends how you set the exam and what you're setting students to do. But a lot of people would argue that it's great at testing memory recall, and straight away you're setting up students against each other. There's an advantage for those that are just good at memorizing things and those maybe like me who are not great at that. And so they're not great for that. We know that they're not great for certain groups of students, maybe with particular neurodivergence challenges, and so for all sorts of reasons, education is sort of moving away from them, although they're still the lingua franca of GCSEs and A-levels. But in higher education, I think we've moved away. We're trying to move away. But in certain disciplines, they're still prominent. You might argue that you would still want medics to do exams. I want a medical student to have, if someone's going to be probing around inside my brain, I want them to know what they're doing. That's a bit of a you know what I mean.
I do.
But I think broadly, there's this challenge around assessment, and it's forcing it's forcing education to really think again. And we don't have the answers yet. So there are lots of different approaches that are being pushed through in education, and some is very much about we have to. If we want to be absolutely confident, for the high stakes sort of assessments, if we're going to be confident, the only way we can do it is set an exam. And so we're looking, probably a lot of universities are looking at sort of a blended diet, which we've had for years, but a blended diet of assessment, where we have some exams, some continuous assessment, some other types of assessment. But it's a real problem. The essay, somebody said yesterday, well, the essay is dead, isn't it? I think it probably is.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you can guarantee that students are writing them themselves, or how are they developing those critical writing skills when you can wholesale just say, well, you can write that for me in literally 2 seconds. You can write that entire essay for me, and no one will know. And I wouldn't have had to put any effort at all into that. I think just one last point. Sorry, just to say, I think the flip side of this though is that I don't want to focus too much on cheating, because it also. I think it's unfair, because I think a lot of students don't want to cheat, But I think what the tools do is, in those scenarios where, let's just say, maybe English isn't your first language and you're studying for an English degree, let's just say you've got 4 million pieces of coursework to do, and you've got a family, or you've got a job, and the assessment's due in next week. What am I going to do? And the temptation is very much there. And so I think as much as my conversations with students, a lot of them saying, well, I don't want to use it. Creative writing is a good example. Actually, I think we want to, people who come on creative writing courses, I think they want to demonstrate their ability to be a creative writer, to use their own tone, their own voice, but it is a significant challenge still in those areas. Yeah,
it's interesting because, as you say, I think that's been the starting position probably from an education point of view. Is it should be outlawed, it's cheating, and we need to crack down on it.
Yeah,
but we've got to a point now where it's very clear it's not going away.
No.
It is going to be a key skill for students to develop, to go into the workforce. And I hear I know your thoughts on that in terms of you can't really help shape them for the workforce, because the workforce hasn't figured out what to do about AI yet either, because it's so new.
Yeah.
But so I guess the follow-up question is, how are you adapting to it to bring it into the educational side of it rather than stamping out the assessment side? How are you embedding it in, and how are your colleagues seeing that, and how are they adapting to it?
It's a really good question again, and it's something that we're all struggling with. We are, it is so important that we engage students with this technology so that we can help them to understand how to use it effectively. So this thing that I was saying earlier about, challenging the output and being critical about what's coming out of these tools, and particularly at the moment, it's a skill that students need to learn, and it's certainly not something that you would know how to do without some direction and practice. So we have to engage students in their courses to look at these tools, to see how they will be impinging on the work that they're doing. So, my faculty is creative and cultural industries. So, the impact of AI is broad across the creative industries. We're going to see it impacting in terms of not only in, traditional written work, but also in video, in production of 3D assets, in programming, because we have games courses, in photography, in design, At the moment, I think those tools actually are quite helpful for all of those areas. And in fact, in a lot of those areas, the tools are still a little bit basic. I think, they're not quite there. I mean, every day we see some amazing progress in terms of visual output from these things, and the video is getting much better. Audio is another one. We've got musicians, we've got music students. That's another challenging area. But I think at the moment they're quite helpful because they can augment learning quite easily. So, for example, if you're an illustrator or you're a graphic designer, you will often have to go and find source materials to help sort of guide a piece of work that you might be doing. And so rather than just go searching around the internet, you can just use these tools now, because you produce me something that looks a bit like that, and then they can use that to augment or inform whatever piece of work that they're doing. And the other side of that is in a lot of our disciplines, it's the journey rather than the finished article. We often assess, or both, but we want to know, the development, the creative development journey, so that students can apply that to everything that they do as they go forward. So, we ask them to show their working out. So it's a bit easier in some of our areas. It's not as impactful in terms of the potential for cheating. But in the more traditional areas, where writing is still the critical output, and assessed essays is still the important piece of work, actually, and programming, difficult. What we're asking to students, what colleagues are trying to do is say, well, how do we scaffold students to learn how to use these technologies properly? So starting to develop assessments and including in classrooms where we say, well, look, let's go through this together. Let's use it to create a draft outline for a piece of work, or let's get it to produce a piece of creative writing, and then let's look at that critically. Is it really good? How can you tell what's good? What does good look like?
How do you measure that?
And so so one of the things that we have to do is get the students looking at these things, the output of these tools critically, and then actually helping them to understand how it is useful for them and how it can augment their learning. And and like I said, using it on a day-to-day basis as a 24/7 personal tutor. Wisdom in my pocket. I can literally ask this thing to help me with anything. And as we move forward, we'll be embedding more of these tools in the institution that are, more narrow AI. Rather than just going out and saying use ChatGPT. We'll have a whole load of tools that are made available to us through, the Microsoft ecosystem, and we can create sort of narrow helper bots around things. Things like health and well-being things, a tool that's sort of like for students struggling, where they can just go, I'm having a really difficult time at the moment, rather than having to wait to speak to a personal tutor, just to have that instant. And I'm not saying we hand that over, because there will always be people in the loop of that, of course, critical. But, they might get the help and support that they need instantly to be able to sort of say, okay, well, this is what you need to do now, and here's where you need to go, to get the help and support that you need. But I think just to close off the bit about what we're doing with regards to assessment, I think it's that flavour of work. It's colleagues struggling with looking at their assessment artefacts and thinking, that essay that I've been setting for the last 5 years, I can't do that anymore. I just cannot do that because I've got no confidence that a student has written that piece of work. So we're having to think about putting additional things in. So it might be that you split the essay up, and like I said, you get them to do some work in the classroom that shows their working out or shows their interactions with these tools and what they've learned from that. So there's a bit of sort of reflective learning and critical learning and meta learning. It might be that we say, well, rather than assessing the essay artifact, what we'd like you to do is with your colleagues to come in and do a presentation or, work in a group on a problem-based scenario, and, the output will be shared in a different format. And so it's challenging all of that stuff. There's absolutely no easy answer to it.
No.
And you go, what I find myself doing is following a route and thinking, oh yeah, this is good. And then you get to a point you sort of think, yeah, even a reflective essay, I could ask ChatGPT to reflect for me.
Yeah.
And we've often used those things as a replacement for an artifact, a final piece of work, or to augment a final piece of work, an output like an essay, for example, where we might ask students to demonstrate knowledge of, or but even those are becoming more difficult to be confident that a student's produced them. So I won't say we're there.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of academic staff are very much on the shore still, and they've got a long way to go. And what we're trying to do as a university is support staff as much as we can. So we have a central team who are going around and helping colleagues to look at their assessments and helping them think about how they might reconceive them. And unfortunately, I think some people are going to say, well, we need some exams.
It's quite an elegant solution. Sometimes that's necessary, but as you say, it's got every trade-off comes with trade-offs. But I understand that you've done a survey recently internally to kind of try and understand your staff's position. Could you talk us through that, please?
Yeah. So it was just a small survey. I just wanted to get a sense of where my colleagues are in my faculty. So not the most scientific piece of research I've ever done, but quite helpful. I got 75 responses. Just over 63% were academics, and the rest were professional support, technical staff. And first of all, I just sort of said, well, what's your overall view of AI? So from the academic staff, 51% were positive about it.
Yeah.
I was actually quite surprised it was that high.
Yeah.
36% were neutral and only 12% were negative. Don't add the numbers up. And then amongst the other staff, almost 60% were positive, 28% neutral, and 14% were negative about it. So yeah, again, I was quite surprised that overall people were perceiving these things to be quite positive. I think if I'd have asked this question a year ago, it would have been much more neutral and negative than that. I asked, do you think that AI can enhance your work? And amazingly, 72% said yes.
That's high.
And that was significantly or sometimes. So, and I think that's quite surprising to me, particularly amongst the academic staff.
Yeah.
So I think there's a move towards an understanding that these tools can be useful and helpful. But I still think we're sort of floating around trying to work out how to use them properly. Most of them are using generative AI tools, so ChatGPT, the ones that are generally available. Academic staff are using it for teaching, for admin, for research, for personal development, productivity, for student support. And I had one person who said they're using it for developing a research bid. Concerns, number one, academic integrity.
Yeah.
No surprise. Second was reliability of output. 3, ethical implications. 4, data security. 5, job security. And 6 was environmental concerns. And then I asked, how likely are you to increase your use in the next year? And 75% said very likely to be using increased use in the next year. And then I asked, what do you think the opportunities are? And the number one opportunity was for streamlining admin tasks. Academic staff, probably no surprise, they've got so much to do, and actually they're being co-opted into all sorts of things outside of teaching. And so podcasting, but anything that can support their, the reduction of administration, I think is going to be a win. And I think there's actually a lot we can do there. And then number 2 was enhancing teaching and learning, so that's quite positive. I've also got some, which I thought were quite good. I asked for some sort of general reflection, so a bit of sort of qualitative output, and so I'll just share a few of these if that's okay. So these are some of the things. Anything that can simplify a task is welcome. I will never rely on it 100%, but it's the smart-ass, non-judgmental pal I always longed for. Somebody said the reduction of onerous admin tasks could be a clear win, but I do not want to rush into a world where my AI writes feedback for a student's AI to read. Yeah. I think we're going to see a bit of that.
Of course.
An ethical view, I see it as an enhancement to practice and not a replacement for labour, but only if it's used ethically and transparently. To take away monotonous tasks, potentially things like minuting meetings, producing reports, pulling data-driven answers from reports, reflecting on the fact that human governance is vital still, so we need the human in the loop. Main concern is the lack of institutional support around AI for work. And I think this is important, because we don't yet have an enterprise version of AI that we can use. I mean, we're rolling out Microsoft 365, which will have quite a lot of AI tools embedded into it, so that will come. But at the moment, and this is a problem, at the moment there's access issues, and that's across the board, staff and students. So, we're asking staff to pay to access ChatGPT on their own at the moment, and so there will be those that are happy to, and will be, streaming ahead with it, and getting really, really confident and learning how to use it so they can teach their students. And the same goes for students. We're going to have students that are thinking, I'll buy that, and then there will be students who, can't afford to buy a tin of beans, and so they won't. So that's a problem at the moment. Last few bits. These are the less positive ones. Some of these made me laugh. AI, but they're sound. AI is part of an ongoing onslaught against the creative industries. Corporations wish to replace expensive staff with cheap AI. We can talk about that. We should get onto the world of work.
Yes.
Students are using it all the time. It's hard to keep one step ahead of them. Honestly, it appears to be most useful in cranking out the inordinate volume of word salad emails and documents that bureaucracies seem to crave for inexplicable reasons. I thought that was
not
great.
A personal attack, is it?
It's just so good. AI largely appears to be a buzzword favoured by tech bros and people who think cryptocurrency is the future. Everything I've seen so far generated by AI, I love this. Everything I've seen so far generated by AI is reminiscent of Athena posters from the 1980s. It's creating a deluge of dull artwork that is filling up the social media feeds and online spaces. I find this disappointing. I do too. Likely, with all productivity tools, the use of AI might increase anxieties and overwhelm and lead to over-reliance on the new toys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's some really pertinent points in there.
I think it's great, and it's a real sort of temperature check of where we are with it.
Yeah.
With a technology like this, just suddenly impinging on everyone's lives. And I get it. I mean, from a lefty point of view, we've got these giant tech companies who are suddenly saying, here's a thing, and you've got to use it. What do? You can't not use it. And I think that's a problem. There's no discussion. There's been no direction. It's very much a case of, well, if you don't get on board with this, you're stuffed.
You'll be left behind.
Or at least that's the way we're made to feel. I think if you use the tools, you get a sense that that's probably true. But I think it's problematic from that point of view, because we are all sort of running around like lunatics now, because some multi-billionaires, smart people, have come up with something that is really impacting on every single part of our lives at the moment.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? I think it's the first time I've experienced it where the tools have been released to the masses rather than being consolidated into products that then get flowed down that have already been figured out. And just to kind of close the loop on how you're working within the school before we move on to the world of work, I think one of the great things AI has great potential for is personalisation at scale, which I would think in a university setting could be brilliant, because people learn differently. They have different needs. It might, or it could play a really positive role in terms of accessibility of courses to a much wider audience.
Yeah.
But that's never going to happen, I would think, if individual lecturers are having to come up with that on their own. They're never going to get to that. It has to be that enterprise architecture. Which could be extraordinarily difficult. And then you add in the layers of like politics and, if Portsmouth University decided to do that, how would that impact it as a university compared to other universities? And there's so many moving parts.
Totally.
I wonder if that'll ever come to pass.
Well, I don't know. I mean, at the moment we are in this very uneven landscape, and it's still very expensive to roll out. I mean, it's getting cheaper. I think ChatGPT do have some more accessible enterprise models now for education. I don't actually know how much it costs, but I still think it's probably too expensive for the university to be purchasing a license for everyone, staff and students. I mean, that's 30,000 students, whatever it might be, 26,000 students. Actually, if you count the staff as well, it is about 30,000 people. So that's a lot of money. Now, I think it will come, as I said, with our new Microsoft infrastructure as we roll that out. The tools are there, the promise is there. And once we've got more of an even landscape in terms of accessibility for these tools, I think it will be easier. Colleagues will be able to play with them. They'll become, generally more part of the way that we do our day-to-day work. And people will be sharing smart ways of using them. We'll get to grips with assessment. I'm sure all of this will happen. We'll be able to create interesting supporter bots, and like you said, for me, for a student to be able to have your own personal tutor that knows what you do, knows how you learn, knows what you're struggling with, can help you with all sorts of things. I mean, that's amazing.
It could form part of the assessment, I guess.
Yeah.
It could feed that back into the university.
Totally.
Big testing.
Yeah.
The person.
Yeah, there are versions of tools available that sort of do this very data-driven, a continuous assessment, if you like, of students, trying to sort of see where they are in their learning journey, and providing support where they need it, and these systems that store all of this information. Now, you put an AI into the middle of all of that, and these things should be really super helpful for individuals. Like you said, I mean, this is the promise of 100% bespoke learning, and we can design assessments, and we can design flexible assessments that will meet the needs of students where they are. I'm really passionate about that. I mean, I keep banging on about this. We've got to meet students where they are. For too many years, we've expected students to be at a particular point in a learning journey, right? You're a first year student. This is what you should learn. You're a second year. This is what you should know. And obviously everything that we do in terms of teaching and assessment should be pushing, supporting students to get to that point. But actually, we know the reality within that spectrum of a group of students. There's all sorts of different capabilities, and so to be able to sort of provide something which is much more bespoke and genuinely supportive and knowledgeable of you where you are, I think that's a great promise.
Yeah.
And I think we're that far away from it. We just don't have the tools in-house at the moment to be able to do that, but we will be able to.
Yeah.
So I think as we do get these more enterprise solutions, organisations are going to be able to understand much more how they can use these tools, where the promise is, and we will see some great benefits come from it. And that goes for any work environment. We will be able to see. There's a load of work that's being done that really is an enormous waste of people's time.
Yeah.
We all do quite a lot of that. There's stuff that we should just be saying, right, let's just hand all of that over. Whatever it is, there will be efficiencies to be made. And this is when it will start to really impact on what the world of work looks like, because I don't think we're anywhere near yet what the impact of these technologies are going to have on work. I think there's a lot of discussion about it, as with everything around this area at the moment. And I think we're seeing some small sort of peripheral impacts on work, and you'll see it sort of in a gradual way, I think, as these tools become more and more embedded. But you can guarantee that if there's money to be saved in companies and organisations, that bosses are going to be looking for saving that money, and it's a no-brainer. I mean, this is how commercial organisations operate. This is the world of work, and so
Absolutely.
we will see that for sure. And I think we'll see it in universities. We're already having to look very carefully in higher education because the sector's challenged financially. So, all universities are going through very significant changes at the moment to accommodate the financial challenges that they're facing. And, at the moment, it's quite a traditional way of approaching it, which is sort of like, well, we need to reduce, we need to cut, we need to make savings. And at the moment, that is essentially, unfortunately, a lot of times reducing the staff, thinking very carefully about how we've organised things in the past and thinking about smarter ways of operating. What we're not doing at the moment, wholesale at least, is thinking, well, there's a machine that can actually do your job. So, I'm afraid, we don't need you anymore. Or we don't need 10 of you. We don't need 20 of you. We just need 2. We are seeing a shift there, I think. I think it's slow. Thankfully, because otherwise we're going to end up with mass unemployment. But I think it is slow. But we are seeing it impacting significantly on programming, for example, at the moment. And there will be a lot of other sort of, in quotes, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but in sort of low-level jobs. But that I think is going to change significantly in the next 3 to 5 years if these tools keep advancing the way they are. So we need to prepare for that. We need to think about what the implications are for our own jobs. I mean, someone was saying the other day, go through your job description today and have a think about how much of that job can be done at the moment, or aspects of that job at the moment could be done by a smart artificial intelligence system. And it's quite an interesting thing to do. And some jobs are much more vulnerable to it at the moment than others. So I think we're going to see a progression, a change as these tools become more easy to deploy, more part of a sort of a general ecosystem of tools that we have in the technology stack. So, the fact that these are being integrated into Microsoft is good, but also will be the way that this forces change the organisation because the tools are there. So we are going to see that, and we need to adapt to it. So we need to adapt to it in our world of work. we will need to adapt to it in terms of what that means for education. What do you need to teach in a world where not only is the nature of the type of work that we're expecting you to do changes, but also, when you've got all of the knowledge that you will ever need, at your fingertips, it's here, So, what are we training people to become, in that future?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think maybe a two-part question to round this off. So, I mean, just from my point of view, what I'm seeing in the market, I mean, we focus particularly across STEM sectors, technology and engineering predominantly. And there's a mass skill shortage in the UK at the moment. Brexit's not helped that in terms of the immigration. It's a massively aging workforce. There's not the flood of candidates coming through. There's a number of other factors as well. I don't think personally that AI has arrived quite in time. I think if it was 5 years ago, maybe that would be a realistic way to be tackling that. I think it will come to tackle some of that shortage by making people more productive or changing the need for some roles. But that's not the case at the moment. So I guess first part of the question is, how do you see universities and industry needing to work together to help solve that problem? And secondly, how do you reassure, for example, you mentioned coders for a couple of times. I'm sure you've got a lot of coders in your current cohort. How do you reassure them about the future? Because I imagine they're feeling quite anxious at the moment, seeing the tools that are coming up.
Yeah, I think, two good questions. I think from the point of view of, the impact on, what we're teaching and how we can work together. I mean, these things go hand in hand, actually. I mean, ultimately, this is a very narrow, people will hate me for saying this, but ultimately, education is about preparing people for work. Right? That's how it was conceived. In the first industrial revolution, it was a way of getting people from the fields into the factories. And actually need to sit some people down in classrooms to teach them some basic stuff so that they could use the machines. That's where the massification of education came from, and that's what we're doing today. Really, I mean. Sadly, I don't think education's moved on particularly a lot since then, but broadly, but essentially that's what we're doing. So we've got this, we're meant to be training people, educating people to be ready for whatever job it is that they need to go into, so that they're going to be useful economic actors, useful for companies, useful for whatever it is that they choose to do. And the world of work that we're trying to train them to move into is changing rapidly. So it leaves us with a real problem, because we are seeing these changes. And as I said, at the moment, it's incremental. I think it will accelerate. And what we're doing at the moment, so let's just take programming. A lot of programmers now are using AI to support their programming. Okay, so all we can do at the moment is say, well, look, this world of work is changing. It hasn't stratified yet, so there's so much movement still. It's like there's no flaw in it, and so we don't know the answer. All we can do is be reactive to whatever position industry is in this minute. And I mean this minute at the moment. So programming, right, okay, well, games companies might be using some artificial intelligence to augment some aspects of their programming. Right? So we need to make sure that our students are competent at using those tools and know how to use the tool to do that at the moment. I can't do anything about the fact that it might be impacting the volume of work required in those areas, so the numbers of programmers, and we will shift and adapt as we see those changes coming. Look, this is something that we've done in education forever. I mean, the world of work has changed a lot since the first industrial revolution.
A little bit.
Yeah, but we're always trying to keep up to date with, or actually challenge and drive industry. And so it's about continuing to have those conversations, these sort of conversations. We invite we make sure that our curriculum, particularly in my faculty, is very much industry informed. It has to be. We have to make sure that our students are using the most up-to-date technology. I can't send graduates into film sets when they've only ever used a mobile phone for filming. So we have to buy extraordinarily expensive pieces of film equipment so that they can transition easily into, So we're always playing this game, and if it's catch up, we're never far behind. But we make sure that our curriculum is industry informed. So that we have a lot of our academics are practitioners, so they're actually working still in the industry. So they're doing the filmmaking and the game making, and we are always inviting industry in. So we have industry panels, we have industry come and talk to students and inform students about what's happening. And so we're trying to be as porous as possible in terms of our interaction with the commercial world or the world outside of education, because we have to be. Otherwise, we're setting up our students to fail. So it's going to have to continue to be that way. I think the difference here, as I've alluded to, is that the world beyond education, nobody really knows what's going on still. We're all working it out, and it is gradual still. And, you will see impacting your work and the way that you're using your tools, and we'll see it in terms of impacting all sorts of different areas like marketing and, and recruitment and all, that it will all be transitioning. Hopefully, we'll be able to sort of keep up, and we'll see how we can use these tools. I think ultimately, though, we'll get to a point where, as I said, these tools will be starting to, in a more wholesale way, replace particular types of jobs. And that's going to require a very significant, on a much more basic economic scale. What does the future of an economy look like, where if you're not having people do particular roles and you want to avoid wholesale unemployment, and the promise of the machines doing all of the work and we can just sit back and go on holiday probably will never materialize. So what does that world look like? And I don't think that's very far away. A lot of people will think I'm talking crazy, but I'm nuts. But I honestly think that, certainly within my lifetime, we will see significant changes in the workforce, And so what does it look like? What's left? Where are the key critical things that humans bring to roles? And it's things like, relationships, the way empathy, creativity to a degree, imagination, it's those sort of things. And sort of ironically, I think, those where, the relational parts of jobs, if you think about those jobs that are really relational at the moment, sadly, they're jobs that are valued by most of us, but undervalued economically. Teachers, nurses, doctors, those sort of roles, carers, where you need the person in the room, you need the person in the loop, you need to look someone in the eye. Until we get really great synthetics, of course.
Of course.
But so I think it's going to be really interesting, and I think we'll have to move in, in step with industry as you guys like us are working it out, making it up. But we will see, I think, those shifts happen, and the nature of the requirement from education in terms of what industry needs is definitely going to change. We don't know what that's going to look like, but we just have to work closely together to ensure that, you're getting what you need in industry, and, we're making sure that our graduates are able to go into the world and get, really good, satisfying work, that's going to sort of maintain them through whatever their career is going to look like.
Yeah.
And it's about skills. It's less about technical knowledge or knowledge of particular areas. I think it's very much skills focused, critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, collaboration skills, communication skills, ethical, reflective, judgment, those sort of things. So that's where we need to be moving to.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Right, I think we've run short on time. I think we could sit here for hours and hours and hours and go on, but I hope others have found this as interesting as I have. So just thank you so much for your time, Simon.
No,
it's
not
really
at all.
great.
Apologies for jabbered on.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah,
Hanging on every word.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers. Thanks, Simon.